Hello, everyone. Welcome to the JuvoHub Podcast. It is awesome to have you here today. Question: have you ever been 99% sure your team's ad copy was compliant, but still had a nagging doubt? Fair housing is a huge topic for our industry, and making mistakes can be big, make things super challenging for you and your team, even if they are unintentional. So I'm super excited to have as a special guest with us today, fair housing attorney Leslie Tucker from Williams, Edelstein and Tucker. She's going to help us today sharpen our instincts. So FYI, we're going to ask in a bit for you to kind of look at some ad copy, some marketing copy, so maybe have something handy when we get to that point. Leslie, it's great to have you here. Can you just take a minute and share with our audience, why is it important to have a refresher about fair housing as it relates to our marketing and advertising?
Well, thanks for having me, Jonathan. I'm really glad to be here with you. I feel like sometimes the advertising prohibitions in the Fair Housing Act, people generally, I think, know that they exist, but a lot of times I think they're overlooked. Maybe because housing providers just aren't seeing or hearing about these types of cases as often as kind of the big, maybe sexual harassment cases, failure to accommodate cases. The facts aren't necessarily as sexy, maybe as compelling as those other types of cases, so they don't really stick out as much. So while companies may be scared, because of these big cases, they know that they have to be careful about reasonable accommodations and they can't make errors when it comes to that. They might let their advertising obligations kind of fall by the wayside. So this is a really important reminder that, this is just as much of a liability concern as, a race discrimination issue or, a failure to accommodate allegation.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for setting the stage for us. Can't wait to hear your insights on this topic. So let's just talk for a moment about why staying current on fair housing matters for everyone in property management. So where do you see the biggest risks when teams, like for example, they let their training go stale?
So advertising is one of those areas where a violation that occurs, it may not be noticed. It may not be caught on the first run or even the second run or the third run, right? But if no one on your team is looking for it, they're not aware that there might be an issue, they're not trying to, identify an issue in any of your marketing materials, your company could, just either continue to run with the same problematic ad over and over or make that same mistakes in their future ads. So it just takes one person, whether that's a prospect or someone from an enforcement agency who is out there looking for these types of mistakes, to catch an advertising violation. And it really can be costly. Sometimes these potential violations aren't necessarily obvious unless your team's been trained to look for them and identify them. And this concern applies just as much to statements made by someone in person to a prospect, which could be a manager, it could be a leasing agent, it could be a receptionist, so anyone at your property that's charged with creating or posting marketing materials, or otherwise providing information to prospects. Anyone that is involved in any of those activities needs to be trained on their fair housing obligations.
Okay. Solid points. Thank you. I know our audience right now is just starting to reflect back on when was the last time maybe they've had a discussion or a training session or reviewed their marketing copy from that perspective. Because as you mentioned, even seemingly harmless phrases, they can be misinterpreted. So do you mind sharing maybe a few examples that you've seen come up recently?
Sure. Yeah. So one big one that comes to mind, there's a common misconception that properties that are associated with a specific religious institution, and there are a lot of them out there, that they can use specific advertising language that indicates a religious preference. This is not the case. This is not accurate. All rental communities are covered by the Fair Housing Act. And so using language like that would be discriminatory.
Okay.
All religions must be welcome. And it must be clear that even if the property has a religious affiliation, that they are an equal opportunity housing provider. And that has to be made clear in your ads. And it's the same thing, let's say, for housing that is for sale within communities where a certain race, ethnicity, or religion is prevalent. And again, there are lots of those out there too.
Mm-hmm.
So even if a seller assumes that only certain types of buyers are going to apply because of, the specific location or area that the property is located in, advertising that targets that specific demographic is still illegal. So that's one big one I think that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Another one that comes to mind, and I'm thinking about a specific case, is prohibiting children in single family rentals. And sometimes this comes up because of maybe potential safety hazards that might be present at the property, and maybe the owner's trying to, mitigate a risk of some sort of liability because of that. But be aware, if you are a broker or a management agent for one of these properties, any listing or advertisement that you post is covered by the Fair Housing Act. So be aware that you cannot restrict children from residing in your properties.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what they look like. I don't care if there's hazards present. And the only exception would be if the property falls under the Housing for Older Persons Act, which would enable you to be exempt from that part of the Fair Housing Act. But otherwise, you have to permit children.
Okay. Two excellent examples, and they really stand out because you may default to a certain type of script based on that type of property. So solid reminders about two components of the Fair Housing Act that just cannot be overlooked at all. So let's get practical for a minute. How often should teams review things like marketing language or scripts? And in your experience, what's something simple that can make a big difference?
So, Jonathan, I don't really think it's a question of how often your material should be reviewed. Your marketing language and material should always be reviewed before it's posted in an ad. But then anytime it's changed going forward, it should be reviewed. I would make the same recommendations for any scripts maybe that are used by your staff when talking to prospects. That's just really, really important. I think sometimes it can be helpful to run through kind of the list of protected categories that apply to you at your property. And again, it's not just the 7 federally protected for a lot of states. There are additional state and local protected categories in a lot of areas around the country. So make sure you are aware of those as well. But kind of go through that list in your head and go through your language that you're using in your materials with each individual category in mind. Could you see a way that anyone in those categories might feel like this language excluded them or discouraged them on the basis of their category, maybe their familial status, the fact that they have kids, right? Or maybe their disability, for example. So that could be a helpful practice when you're going through your materials.
Okay. Nice application. Nice reminder for all of us. And just for our audience too, in conjunction with these amazing tips and reminders that Leslie's been giving us so far, the Fair Housing Institute has an incredible white paper that focuses on marketing phrases, things to say, things not to say. So we'll make sure that there's a link to that resource, so you'll have that available to review as a team. Also, it's super helpful to kind of have a bit of a template in mind as you go through some of these exercises with your team. So Thank you again, Leslie, for some of these tips and best practices. So in the beginning, I said we want you to just take a minute and reach out and grab some copy that you may have. Anything you have handy, your latest Facebook Marketplace ad or something you have in an ILS or something along that line. So grab those and take a look at it. You know, while you're on the show, look at it. How does it measure up? When's the last time you reviewed it? And Leslie, as they're doing that, what language should they be on the lookout for? Or even better, what kind of language do you recommend using instead?
I would be on the lookout for language that targets specific types of prospects. So anyone that's worked in sales before ever in their life knows that it's a tactic to know who your target audience is. Mm-hmm. And then you reach out and you use language to appeal to that audience. But when you're dealing with housing advertisements, you can't really do that. Sometimes targeting a specific demographic can result in other groups feeling unwelcome or excluded. For example, appealing to households maybe that are on the younger side, maybe professionals, emphasizing surrounding nightlife and things like that, that could discourage families with children. And it could discourage maybe older households, which would really only be an issue in jurisdictions where age is a protected category. But again, that's something that you should be aware of, depending on where your property is located. Instead, I would recommend focusing primarily on describing your housing features, your amenities, unit layouts, your pricing, really just objective factors rather than who should be living in your housing. It's a good idea to have photos of your property, but if you choose to use photos of people in your ads, just make sure that you're being inclusive in your photos. Make sure that you have individuals of different races. I don't care what your property looks like in reality, your ads should be inclusive. People with disabilities, families with children, if that's applicable to your property, throughout your ads.
All right. So I think these are all great. This is all awesome. Good way to look at it. So audience, again, take a look at your ad copy or whatever it is you have in front of you, and just see how it measures up. Doesn't take much. Just one wrong phrase could land you into some challenges. So very good. Thank you. So far we've really hit the nail on the head with our objectives today. Marketing and advertising and fair housing, some good examples on some common mistakes that people may make when it comes to creating their ad copy. And now we've actually looked at some ad copy and just taken a look to see what our pictures look like, what does our script look like, what does our words look like. So before we go, just to reinforce this teaching point for our JuvoHub community, what's one phrase or habit you challenge our listeners to rethink starting today? And if they have a takeaway, what would it be, I guess?
So remember that reviewing your print ads or those that you post to Zillow or other online platforms, that's really, really important. And we've talked a lot about that. Something that we haven't talked about necessarily is if you train someone to review your ads, which is great, and you should, but then you have someone entirely different and possibly not trained in charge of posting on socials, you are still very much at risk. The content of your social media pages can certainly be considered advertising, and it's subject to scrutiny under the Fair Housing Act. So make sure that any information that you're putting out into the world about your property is being reviewed to make sure it's compliant or being created by someone who knows what they are doing and who has been trained. And remember that regular training, not just for maybe your marketing person, but for all of your staff, especially those that talk to prospects, that is the best preventative measure that you can take to avoid legal trouble.
Perfect. Awesome reminder. Yeah, and I'd like to reiterate too from a learning discipline perspective. Why do we talk about regular training? That's what you're passionate about it. I know you know the answer to this, but we'll say it just for emphasis sake. It doesn't matter what kind of training you provide. You're dealing with retention factors, and retention can vary from one person to another. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter what type of fair housing training that you are providing, you're going to have a retention challenge, because none of us, doesn't matter what it is, even if we had the most perfect teacher in the world, it's unrealistic to assume that we have 100% retention. That's why regular training is so important, especially when we think of subjects like fair housing, because of the compliance in our industry. It's just only going to benefit. It's only going to make your staff feel a lot more confident. So great takeaway, Leslie, training being such a huge component on this topic. Okay, so pop quiz, true or false? You can refuse a reasonable accommodation if it's inconvenient. A little bit of a different direction than our marketing topic here today, but let's throw a little curveball in for our audience.
Well, I hope that you listening out there know that the answer to this question is false. Convenience is not a factor when it comes to reasonable accommodations. Residents shouldn't receive accommodation simply because it just makes things more convenient for them. And likewise, a housing provider can't deny an accommodation request because it happens to be inconvenient for them. The standard for denial is either the request is unnecessary due to the person's disability, there is no nexus or connection between a disability and the accommodation, or the accommodation is unreasonable. So, and just as a reminder, unreasonable means that the request would constitute an administrative and financial burden, or it'd be a fundamental alteration of your program. Okay, either of those things makes it unreasonable. But nowhere in any of those denial reasons did I mention inconvenience. So be aware the convenience factor shouldn't enter the discussion at any point.
Awesome. And that was somewhat intentional putting this question in here because we want you to look at some more awesome training videos from the Fair Housing Institute on this topic. So we will be sure to put a link to one of their blogs and video or their podcast on this topic, and you'll get some more education on fair housing when it comes to reasonable accommodations. But to wrap up today focusing on marketing and advertising, if I was to do my own pop quiz question, reviewing your copy once is sufficient, I would say false. Is that true?
I think you're probably right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we never know. Review it a few times. Lots of tips, lots of takeaways in this episode. So Leslie, thank you so much for bringing and kind of breaking it down for us. A lot of different angles, a lot of different perspectives, different property types. It affects all of us. So a wealth of knowledge here. So how can people connect with you, Leslie?
So if you or your team, your company has questions about the compliance of your ads, your marketing efforts, I am happy to work with your team on that. You can find me at fairhousingfirm.com.
Awesome. And I know you're a national speaker and trainer. You're an attorney, but you also go out and teach people, for leadership sessions and for property management companies. So definitely everyone, if you're looking for a speaker for your team, for your next event, your apartment association event, company event, whatever it is, make sure you check out fairhousingfirm.com. Get more information on those things only. So awesome show. Closing it out. If you only remember one thing, let it be this: fair housing isn't just a law. It's a daily practice. You know that. keep checking, keep learning, and stay compliant. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the JuvoHub Podcast. Take care.